Okay, and thank you all for wearing masks. It's like a good deal. The median grade was a 44, and the mean was 43.3. That's pretty high. Just you know, you only have 25% of your grade in, but that was very good. Remember I said that if you get at least an 80%, if you get 80%, you get at least a B minus, and if you get 90%, at least an A minus. So people are in this at a median of actually the median was 44 and the mean was 43.3. So we got a pretty high. I don't know what your other classes are in terms of what the median grade is, but I suspect it's not. If you listen to Dr. Arnn, right, it's supposed to be a C, or C plus or something. But anyway, did very well. So let's go ahead and go over the exam. The multiple choice was, and probably some of you didn't bring your exam with you, but I'll just read it anyway. Which of the following is true of transactions cost? Well, the first one's true. eBay and Craigslist are a market response to search costs, right? You guys can find something much easier than you could back 15 years ago if you're looking for, a 65 Ford Mustang. 2 is true, B, that possession of an article presumes ownership as a way to reduce bargaining costs. That is, I don't have to figure out, if you actually have title. If we presume possession is 90% of the law, then you can presume that the other person owns the right to this thing. So when you're bargaining, you don't have to make sure that there's some sort of, you sort of know what it is. Now, again, if it is something that's expensive, like a house or a car or something, then you have title. Actually have titles for that. And then bargaining costs are lower if the parties know each other's BATNA, right? Look at what's going on with the House and the Nancy Pelosi and the Senate and the President. Actually, very good. Let me see here. There's Daniel's thing here. Boy, I should have. It is, of course, one of the last ones. There you go. What's going on with Nancy Pelosi is and the president in terms of this coronavirus relief. I don't know if you've been following this, but they don't know each other's BATNA, right? I mean, that's part of what's going on. You don't know what Trump will sign in terms of, will he sign $2 trillion or will he sign $3 trillion? And Pelosi, you don't know what the Democrats' BATNA is, and so they're having trouble connecting there. So all the above is true. So which of the following, number 2, which of the following is or are true? Again, all of them are true. In a prisoner's dilemma, all the players have a dominant strategy that results in a payoff for each of them, which is less than if they did the cooperative strategy. So that's one of the reasons you have government, right? Is to steal or not steal is oftentimes used in a prisoner's dilemma situation as an example. If transactions costs are high, well, what's going to happen? The right's going to stick with the person, or likely to stick with the person that you assign it to. So the efficient assignment of property rights requires knowledge of which party values the property right more. And then 3 characteristics of a pure public good are: 1, they're non-rival in consumption, everybody gets the same amount, and it's difficult to exclude. So information is like that as well. Number 3, first fundamental theorem of welfare economics says what? Competitive markets result in a Pareto optimal state. Okay, so that's the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. Now, the problem, of course, is there's lots of different Pareto optimal states of the world, and how do you choose among them? And in 415, we spend a good deal of time working on that. B, there is no such thing as a social welfare function. Well, that's not what the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics is. I mean, in 415 we can talk about whether one exists or not, but that is not the first fundamental theorem. Individual utility functions are convex to the origin. Of course, that's not what one of the fundamental theorems is, so A is the correct answer there. Which of the following is or are true? A is true, right? In distinguishing common law from civil law, what is civil law? Civil law is statutory law, and what is common law? Common law is where you do it by precedent, right? So judges tend to have more influence on common law, and so in civil law, you look at what does the language of the law say. I don't know if you're following. There's a person that's being nominated for the Supreme Court, and there's sort of an issue going on with that, right? But anyway, when she was interviewed, that's one of the things that she said is that you need to examine what does the language of the law say, right? A complaint does require the plaintiff to state what statute or other law is relevant. In a civil suit, both parties can appeal, right? And that sort of affects when you're making a judgment whether to have a suit and you're looking at the expected costs and expected benefits. You have to realize that the other party, even if they win, if they don't win enough, they could go ahead and appeal. So the correct answer there is A for 4. And then finally, which of the following is true? All those things are true. The rule against perpetuity sets a time limit on how long you can restrict the use of the property you bequest. I mean, the idea being that we may not know what the efficient use of that property is 150 years from now, so you shouldn't be able to restrict that. Adverse possession, again, if you want to make it so that people are relatively certain about what the title is. If they've been using it for 15 years in the state of Michigan, you've never said, that's my property, you can't use it, then you after 15 years you can't do that. That's adverse possession. And then cooperation surplus is the gain from when bargaining takes place. We talked about if you buy my guitar, then you must have valued the guitar more than I did, otherwise the transaction wouldn't have happened. The amount of surplus, or how the surplus gets distributed, depends on who can bargain the best, right? I might get 80% of the surplus, or you might get 60% of the surplus. It depends on what we bargain to. So the correct answer there is all the above. All right, so any questions on any of the multiple choice? Okay, so again, people did pretty well on that. All right. True, false. One way to deal with the public good characteristics of information is to subsidize basic research, right? That was one of the things that we talked about. Information has those pure public good characteristics to them, that once I know about it, and then you learn about it, doesn't mean I don't know about it anymore. We all have the same amount of information once it's out there, and it's difficult to exclude. Once people know this, if I know something, it's difficult for me to exclude you from knowing about it. It'll get spread around. So one way to deal with that is for the government to have the National Bureau of Economic Research or a National Science Foundation or something like that that will subsidize what the basic research is. Number 2, at the appellate level, the party that lost the lower court, and when you're appealing, you can't introduce new evidence, right? I mean, that's one of the things that is the case. You have to show that there was an error in law. There was an error in what the court decided or what the judge decided as a matter of law. 3, in the case of emergency, you can use another person's property to provide them with compensation afterwards, right? And that's true, and that's because what do you want to happen? You want the person that values it the most to be able to use it, and you have high transactions cost. So if there were, like we used the example, if you were lost in the woods somewhere and you came across, hurricanes coming up or something, and there's somebody's house there, but somebody's cabin, but they're not there for you, and you don't know who owns it, right? Then you can use the property. Now, the idea is that if you should then seek out who owns it and let them know, and compensate them if you had a damage or something. But the idea is that in the case of high transactions costs, at that moment you could basically use the property and then provide compensation afterwards. Copyright lasts for the lifetime of the creator plus 70 years. Okay, so copyright laws have been extending the length of the copyright, but it's for the lifetime of the creator plus 70 years, so that would be false. And then last, nonprofit organizations do not have owners, right? And that's correct. They have governors, board of people who govern the institution, and that's because their purpose is not to profit. Right? They have a separate purpose. The purpose of Hillsdale College is not to generate profit for the college, right? But if you were a University of Phoenix, okay, then people own the University of Phoenix because its purpose is to provide, to provide profit for the owners of the University of Phoenix. So you could have, if it's a for-profit, as opposed to a nonprofit, usually is what's called a 501c3, which is the section of the Internal Revenue Code that deals with not-for-profit, then it has a board of governors. All right, so any questions on that true-false? All right, first essay question. Suppose you can buy insurance that will protect you from your house catching fire. If the house catches fire, it will be a loss of $100,000, and there's a 10% chance of your house catching fire. Okay? 1, briefly explain what the expected loss would the fire be given these values and probabilities. Okay? So we said that expected value of anything is what? It's the probability of the event happening times the amount, right? Whether it's a cost or whether it's revenue that you would get in, whether, if you're buying a lottery ticket or something like that. And so in this particular instance, we have that the loss is $100,000, and there's a 10% chance, so the expected value is what? $10,000. Okay? So if you just have your house sitting around and you don't have fire insurance on it, then you have an expected loss of $10,000. So that's part 1. Number 2, briefly explain what is meant by a person being risk averse. Okay? So we said that risk averse comes from diminishing margin utility of income, right? That is, if we were to put utils, right, utility, and we had income here, it's gonna look like this, right? That is, the added utility from the next dollar of income gets smaller, at least after some point. We said that there might be some cases like with Scrooge McDuck where that doesn't happen, but probably if you look at if you look at Bill Gates, if Bill Gates were to get an extra $50, probably the margin utility from that $50 is close to 0, right? It's not going to affect what he does during the day. Whereas if you are, maybe a student here, if I gave you an extra $50, right, then you might get a substantial increase in your utility. So what does that mean then? It means that the person, if you have a diminishing margin utility of income, what is it going to mean? It means that you are willing to pay more than the expected value to have something that's certain than something that is uncertain that has a higher expected value. So in this particular instance, it's basically that if we looked at this instance, if we look at this, the expected value of no insurance and a fire, and the expected value of paying $10,000 of insurance would be the same, right? So if you paid $10,000 for insurance, then what would happen in either case? In the first case, if you paid for the insurance, what do you got? You got $90,000, right? For certain, right? Because the insurance company is going to pay if you have a fire. But if you don't have insurance, then we just noted that the expected loss, so no insurance, the expected loss is 10,000. So what's the expected value of the situation where you don't have insurance? It's also 90,000. Okay? So this is with certainty, the 90,000, and this is an expected value. So if we're looking at if you were not risk averse, you'd be indifferent between those two. But if you're risk averse, you'd prefer 85,000, just as an example, right? 85,000 with certainty over the 90,000 with uncertainty, right? So a risk-averse person prefers a certain outcome with less expected value than the uncertain outcome that has a certain expected value. So that's what it means to be risk-averse. So in this particular instance, what would happen? You'd be willing to, how does that make the demand for insurance, right? The demand for insurance says, I'm willing to pay more than $10,000 for the insurance, right? Because if you thought about it, the insurance company would, if they were doing that for everybody, they wouldn't make any money, right? Because the expected loss is $10,000, and if everybody was paying $10,000 for an insurance premium, then they'd be paying out more, or paying out exactly the same that they were taking in, and so they wouldn't make any profit. So the demand for insurance is going to be that you're willing to pay more than the expected loss for the certainty of having the outcome. You know what your certain loss is. Your certain loss is whatever the insurance premium is. Okay, so you're willing to pay more for that insurance premium than what your loss might be. What is the moral hazard that you would have is that once you're insured, then you don't take as much precaution as you otherwise would, okay? So if you're insured against a fire, then you may not clear out the brush from around your house. Whereas if you are not insured, then you'll take the precaution of clearing out the area around your house. So how do insurance companies deal with that? They either have co-pays, they have deductibles, they may reduce your insurance if you do things. So for example, if you have a type of roofing shingle that's fireproof, they may reduce what your insurance is. So that's the mechanics about how they might deal with that. All right, so any questions on number one? No? All right, so number two. Briefly discuss the difference between the awarding of damages and injunctions in dealing with the harm to one individual from the breach of that person's property right by another person, okay? Well, if you're going to do that, if you're going to discuss the difference, you got to tell me what an injunction is, right? So if you didn't tell me what an injunction was, I took off a point, okay? So if you're going to discuss the difference between two things, you should tell the person what those two things are. So what is an injunction, right? An injunction is the requirement that the other party do something or not do something, right? So you can't trespass on my property, or you have to do something with your property. Okay? Or you have to do something to improve my property. An injunction says, I got the right to tell you to not do something or the right to tell you to do something. So that's what an injunction is. It's a property right. Okay? So part B, then it says, and damages are backward looking, right? So damages are when you do something that violates my property right, then you have to compensate me for that property right, okay? For the damage that you did to me. So injunctions are a property right, whereas compensation is, as I said, backward looking, that you compensate me for the use of for your use of my property. So, briefly discuss why injunction relief is more efficient in the case where transactions costs are low. Okay? Well, when transactions costs are low, what we would have is that the parties will bargain. Right? The parties will bargain, and the property right will go to the party who values it the most. So the important point here is that an injunction is a property right. Right? So when transactions costs are low, we would expect that property right to go to the person who values it the most, just as when we were talking about the Coase theorem. Now, then it says, and why it's more efficient in the case is when transactions costs are low. That's because with with low transactions costs, I can use that Coase theorem and know that it's going to go to the person who values it the most. Okay? Now, compensatory damages are used when transactions costs are high. So why do we use compensatory damages when you have high transactions costs? Well, if you have compensatory and you have that the transactions costs are high, what's the problem? The problem is that the property right will stick with the person you assign it, or to whom it's assigned. Okay? So what does that mean? I have to know the relative values. Right? So if I've got if an injunction is like a property right, then transactions costs are high, it's going to go and likely to stick with the person who values it the most. So I got to know which person values the injunction more, okay? Because I got a high transactions cost. But with compensation, you have a mechanism of a forced sale, essentially. Right, or can be. Well, we'll put it can be. You may not have the sale, but that is, I can buy it from you. I can buy the right from you by just violating your right and paying you what the compensation is. Okay? So the party without the right can obtain the right by violating and paying compensation. So what does that mean? That is, if the party that doesn't have the right values it more, right? The party without the right, if it values it more, then they can obtain the right. Right? So even though there's high transactions costs, if I using the example that we had before, what does the law normally say? The law says that you can use somebody's house or cabin, right, if you're lost, and then you compensate them, okay? So effectively what's going on is that I'm buying the right by compensating you, okay? So when transactions costs are high, you at least have the situation where if the party that doesn't have the right values it more, then you can they can effectively buy it by simply violating your property right or taking your property right and then compensating for that. What's a difficulty in awarding damages, that is compensation, when dealing with harm when transactions costs are high, right? So we're going to say when transactions costs are high, injunctive relief is going to be less efficient than compensation, but you got to get the compensation right, okay? The problem, a problem is how to know what the efficient compensation is. Remember that when we were talking about compensation, we were saying, what do you want to do? You want to get the person back to their original utility. Okay, and we gave the example if you had an injury and you would pay for their medical costs to get them back to where they were, and then any loss of income that they might have had if they were out of work for 3 months or something like that. Okay, and that if you couldn't get them back to their same health level, right? There was, maybe they lost their leg. You couldn't put their new, can't give them their old leg back. Then what do you have to do? You have to pay them more than their loss of income. You have to pay them enough to get them back to the utility level where their health and income on that utility is where it was before. A different income health combination, but to get you back to the same utility level. Well, how do I know what that utility level is, right? I mean, that's the difficulty. And if you do it that way, if you set the compensation too high, well, then what could happen is it might be valued more, the property might be valued more by the person who didn't have the right, and it would be efficient to allow them to have a forced sale. But the problem is that you've set the compensation level too high. You don't have perfect compensation. If you had perfect compensation, what would happen? The person who had the property right would be indifferent as to whether you didn't use it or you used it and you compensated them, right? The perfect compensation says you're going to restore them to the same utility level, so they should be indifferent. So if you set it too high, maybe put another 0 there. If you set the compensation too high, it could remain with the party who values it less. Right? Now, if you set the compensation too low, then you just get the opposite, right? If I set it too low, then because it's a forced sale, the person who values it less can obtain it. All right? So the problem with compensatory damage is how do you get to know what the perfect compensation is, right? And so that's a difficulty, and then you can sort of think of all the transactions costs in doing that, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. All right, so any questions on number 2? All right, number 3. So a farmer's fertilizing his field, and the fertilizer moves into the groundwater of the homeowner. Okay, that can happen here in Hillsdale County or whatever. Okay, so and what's going on is that the value to the farmer is $100. The value of fertilizing is $100. It's $100. Now, the loss from the loss to the homeowner from having their water being contaminated is $60. Okay, so the loss to the homeowner is $60. But they can install a filter for $30, right? So they can fix the problem for $30. Notice this is the exact same situation that we talked about with the train going along, right? The train could throw sparks, and there was a cost to the train, so the value of being able to throw sparks and not have to put the spark arrestor was so much. If the sparks caught the farmer's land on fire, there was a loss to the farmer. But the farmer could do what? The farmer could clear away, a certain amount of property, and so the loss to the farmer would be the loss of clearing the land, or clearing the land from their corn, right? Or we use the same example about the farmer and the rancher, and the rancher's cattle could get in there and eat the farmer's corn, but the rancher could, the farmer could put up a fence. Okay, so same story. Okay, so the net loss to the homeowner is going to be $30, right? Because they can put the filter. Some people wanted to act like you would lose the $60 and you had to put a filter in. Okay, well, why would you put a filter in if all it was doing was nothing, right? So what's the filter supposed to be doing? The filter's like the filter is like the fence for the cow in that story. Or it is like the clearing the land for the rancher the farmer with the train going by. Okay, so the net loss, right, to the homeowner is going to be $30. So, and then it says explain the efficient outcome of what the situation is and who should end up. Well, the net value of to the farmer is $100. The value of that property right to the homeowner is $30 because that keeps them from having to install the filter. Notice you can't just assert that the farmer values it more. Okay, it says explain, and again, a lot of you have had me for other classes. I want you to be able to explain it to somebody. You can't just like assert, oh, right. You want to be able to explain to the other party why this is the efficient outcome. Okay, so I took off a little bit if you didn't explain that the value to the farmer was 100 and the loss to the homeowner was 30. So then the next part is what is the Coase theorem, right? So the Coase theorem says that in the absence of transaction costs or low transactions costs, then for an efficiency standpoint, it doesn't matter to whom the property is assigned, right? Because then the two parties will bargain because there's low transactions costs, and will go to the owner of the party. Use that to the Coase theorem to explain under what conditions it make no difference whether the loss is the farmer supply fertilizer and why the outcome will be the same if each of these conditions hold. So what it says is that if there are low transactions costs, then the farmer could pay, if the farmer has the property, right? If the farmer has it, then the most that the homeowner would pay for the property right's 30, right? Because if they wouldn't pay 35 because they could just install the filter for 30. So the most that the homeowner would pay is $30, but the farmer isn't going to sell it for less than 100, and so it'll stick with the farmer. If the homeowner has it, then what can happen, right? The farmer will pay up to $100, right, for the property right, because it values it at $100. So they'll pay up to 100. They won't pay more than 100. And the homeowner would accept something greater than 30. And so the property right would then move to the farmer, right? So in either case, whether the farmer starts out with it or the homeowner starts out with it, it'll end up with the farmer. Now, how much? There's a bargain going on, and we were just talking in the multiple choice about cooperative, the surplus from people coming together, right, and making the bargain, the cooperative surplus. Okay, so who's going to get the majority of that depends on lots of things, right? Like the best, their BATNAs, et cetera. So the farmer's going to get some of it. The farmer will pay, if the farmer pays more than 30, then part of that surplus is going to the homeowner. If the homeowner accepts 70, then they'll get $40 of the $70 difference. Okay, so any questions on 3? No. Okay, last one. What is a patent? Right? A patent is a right to the ownership of an invention or a process or a technical innovation so there's an improvement in the standard of living here going on, right? Some improvement in our knowledge, right? It's a right to intellectual property, okay? So it then says, discuss how a long patent encourages innovation. Well, the key to the patent is what? It provides a monopoly, right? You can earn monopoly profit. So the longer the patent, then the more monopoly profit you can earn, right? So a longer patent, you get more monopoly profit. So what does that do? That says more incentive to innovate. Right? So if I can have this patent for 20 years, then I'm going to get more monopoly profit than if I have it for 5 years. Okay? But what's the cost to doing that, right? The cost of doing that is the cost of monopoly, right? The cost of monopoly is what? That other firms can't enter, right? So there's less supply, and prices are higher, right? You go back to principles of your ECON 202, right? If you're earning economic profit, which is what you need to do to get the innovation, right? So if you're earning economic profit, what would happen? Other firms enter the industry, supply curve shifts to the right, prices fall, more people have it. So if you say, no, you can't enter the industry, then what will happen? Over a lengthier period of time, you get less dispersion of the product to people, okay? So if we were to look at a vaccine for COVID-19, then if you were to have a lengthier patent, then there'd be more incentive for drug firms to to introduce or to innovate and find the vaccine. Now, of course, this is sort of a unique situation where I guess a number of the pharmaceutical companies they're going to do it at zero economic profit or however they're talking about it. But in general, a lengthier patent gives more incentive for innovation because you can earn, the incentive to innovate is the monopoly profit that you can earn. What is a trademark, right? If we look at what a trademark is that it is the ownership of a distinctive symbol that identifies the output of a firm, right? So it's going to be a distinctive symbol that identifies the output. That's what a trademark is. It's the ownership that identifies the output of a firm. Well, what's the advantage of that, right? It reduces the cost to consumers of knowing quality, right? So if I see like I said, if I see a hotel, one of which is a Marriott and one of them is the Motel 6, okay, that's their symbol, that's their trademark. They're sitting out there. I know what the quality of the Marriott is because I've been to Marriott hotels before, et cetera. And I know what the quality of the Motel 6 is. And so I don't have to figure that out, right? Let's say I'm driving to I'm taking a trip to California or something, and I'm driving along, and I drive into some town in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm looking for a hotel, right? When I see the different hotel signs there, I have an idea what the quality is, right? Which is one of the reasons if you sell your trademark to somebody else, what does it say? You have to supervise or actually keep the production of doing it because the purpose of the trademark is to be a sign of quality. And of course, why would you want a trademark to end? You don't want a trademark to end, right? You don't want to be able to say, oh, okay, now whoever's running the Motel 6, they can now switch all their signs to Marriott and just do it that way after a certain amount of time. Why would you not want to do that? Because the point was to allow the consumer to know what's going on. And so that's what the economic reasoning for efficiency in a trade, why you'd want to have trademarks is because of this sign of quality, which reduces you, the consumer, your cost of figuring out what the quality of things are. All right, any questions on 4? All right, so for next time, what we'll go back to resume our discussion in chapter. I believe we were in chapter 6. Or we were in chapter 6 or 7, I can't remember. But anyway, the topics of property law. And so go ahead and read ahead for that. Again, if you have any questions on your exam, I'll be in my regular office hours this week, and you can bring it in. But people did extremely well on it. All right?